Welcome back to the Unbreakable Boundaries podcast with your host, myself, Jennifer Maneely. I am really excited about this episode for today. It's going to be a really unique episode. So, my mom and I were talking to this other mother-daughter team who's gone through a similar journey, and we really wanted to do a podcast with one another. And we thought it was going to be a really cool conversation. We wanted to talk a lot about the family dynamics and some of our experiences of what it's like to kind of adult with one another as parent and child. And sometimes that can be really complicated, especially with mothers and daughters. And so we knew it was going to be a really powerful conversation, and we decided to do something different than just record a simple podcast. And we actually opened it up to a live audience, and we invited people in just to be a fly on the wall and listen to some of this conversation. And it was just an awesome, raw, real conversation between two mothers and daughters. And I am excited to bring you my own mom, Lynn Carnes, and then Christine Dickson and her daughter, Lauren Martinson. So I really hope that you enjoy this podcast. And please always remember that there is always hope, even when things seem the most hopeless.
Well, welcome everyone. Jen, Lauren, Christine, and Lynn here for a live podcast with the mother-daughter conversation. And, I was thinking about what started this. We're actually really here, and the reason we're live is just for the realness of this conversation. I mean, if you think about it, who would have ever thought it would be hard to be real? And yet, when I think of a lot of mother-daughter relationships I know, including my own at different times, both with my mother and with my daughter, they haven't always been real. And so I'm excited that we're coming here, but we're not coming here for those of you listening because we think we've got it all figured out. We're just two sets of mothers and daughters that have been on journeys that are sort of similar, and we want to share that with people. And we also want to celebrate and explore the journeys that we have been on, maybe for the sake of having a better relationship. What does it mean to have an adult relationship? And I think, Christine and Lauren, when I met you, that's what struck me, was that you all have an adult relationship, which Jennifer and I have worked so hard on. And Christine, I also think about that moment when we were in the podcast summit, and the one of the presenters said something about mothers and the relationship people have with their mothers, and you could feel it in the room. Mm-hmm. That so many people have this experience that's not necessarily great with the mothers and daughters. So I think about, I went back to my own mother, who I'm not going to bring into this conversation because she's not around anymore. This is about Jen and I, but we had an experience when we were both in a barn working with one of my trainers, and all of a sudden the trainer said something to Jen, and Jen ran out of the barn, and we think she was crying. And the trainer looked over at me and she goes, "Lynn, what just happened?" And I said, "I don't know. I think maybe you hit one of her mommy buttons." Mm-hmm. And so we sat there puzzling, knowing that she was outside crying and wondering, okay, what was this? And in a few minutes, she came back in and said, "Okay, I'm ready to work again." And then later I asked her how she brought herself back. And she said, "I've been reading Brene Brown's books, and I can almost hear Brene Brown's voice in me saying, 'Don't let this run you.'" And I thought, oh, this is good. Like, it was one of those moments where Jen showed up as an adult. So that's kind of what we're here to do. And so with that,
I would say not all adults have that skill yet. So
anyway. what's interesting? I just, we're about to introduce ourselves. I just was having this conversation with a corporate executive that's stuck in, parent-child dynamics at work. And so how is, one of the things we want to talk about is how do parent and child, actual parents and children, do better than just a basic parent-child dynamic? of power over and under. That's one of our conversations that we want to have here. And, we just want to help make our relationships better. I can't wait for this conversation. So for technicalities, we are recording this. For those of you who are on and watching, cool, welcome. We're glad to have you. And for those of you who are listening after the fact, we're glad to have you as well. For those of you who are on, we're also going to hold a little bit of time at the end. Probably I'm on Eastern time, so I'm going to use that time. 2:30 Eastern, we may switch our conversation into Q&A through the chat. So if you're familiar with Zoom, there's a chat feature. Just plug in your questions or comments or thoughts, and we'll try to keep an eye on that. But there's a lot to manage here with 4 people as well. So if we're not on it right away, that's because we're still trying to manage everything. So, and if we get a lot of questions, by the way, we have already talked about this, may be something we do again. First of all, because I just love talking to the 3 people that I'm on this conversation with. As you all know, it's like, I want any excuse to be on a conversation with them.
Same.
So with that, we're going to start with introductions. And I don't know, I'll start with, since I'm talking, I'll start with just my introduction. As you all know, I'm Lynn Carnes. My daily life looks like this. I have a 9-month-old puppy that I've been training since she was a little puppy. I get up every day and have to take care of her. I try to get in a good hike or a water ski every day, ride horses every day, occasionally fly airplanes every day. And once I get those big rocks on my calendar, I put coaching clients on the calendar. And I had a coaching client here for a 2-day retreat this week. When we finished at 3:00 on Tuesday, I ran out and water skied, and then I went and got on a horse, and then I came back and trained my dog. So that's the kind of life I live and kind of who I am and what I do. So, who wants to go next?
No one.
Okay.
Who's gonna follow
Okay. It's you, Lauren. Tag, you're it.
Lauren spoke first.
Like, who can follow that up? I'm like, oh my God, my life is so boring.
You're so funny. Not hardly. I know better.
I'm Lauren Martinson, and I live in Los Angeles, and my day-to-day life is much simpler. I would say that I really work to be able to travel. So a lot of my day-to-day is kind of, simple in a lot of ways, just so that I can have those big moments of travel and exploration and whatnot. But yeah, my day looks like going for a walk in the morning, meditating, seeing some clients throughout the day, and then sort of scrambling to get organized and clean up and take care of my fur baby, which is Draco Meowfoy, my adorable kitten. And yeah, that's about me.
Cool.
Christine, I'm volunteering you.
Oh, I was about to volunteer you because I was like, oh, okay.
Oh no, I spoke first. So I volunteered you first.
Okay. All right. So my name is Christine Dickson. I live just outside of Los Angeles on a horse property with my horses, my chickens, my cats, and my dog. And I work as a transformational mentor using clinical hypnotherapy and equine assisted coaching. And predominantly, I work with people who have experienced pathological relationships, either with their parents, their children, or their love relationships, and how that plays into addiction as well. So I am kind of, I guess, I get really jazzed about what I do. So I do go for walks too. I have the Angeles National Forest right here. So I take my dog for walks. I go for walks to do stuff like that. And I do love to travel, but mostly, yeah, it's about being around the animals and working with clients and just being a student of life.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, my name is Jennifer Manili, and I try to model a lot of my life after my mom. I think my mom has a pretty cool life, but I'm still also in a very different place in my life, which means I still, have to try to get up in the morning and do some things. And I work a lot with families that have loved ones with substance abuse issues, and that was mostly born from my mom and I's journey together through that. And we've learned and grown a lot in the way. And so that's kind of where that came up. And I had someone, because I do a lot in my day-to-day life, and I had someone ask me one time, she goes, man, you like do a lot. How do you have how do you even pack it all in? I say, well, I guess it's because I only do the things that I want to do. So everything that I do are the things that I want to do. And I may do a lot of stuff, but it's all because it's the things that I want to do. So I look forward to everything I do. So that's kind of my life. So living in North Carolina as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Jen and I have the good fortune to live close to each other. I'm not even sure we made it clear who's mother and who's daughter. Most people know who we are. But we have the good fortune to live close to each other. And if there's any enabling going on now in our world, it's Jennifer enabling me to do what I need to do, like taking care of my dog when I'm gone, or we have chickens too, Christine. I love chickens. But Jen's the one who makes sure they get up every night. So yeah, I get to enjoy the eggs. She gets to enjoy all the work. That's the way that works out. It's kind of nice. Well, we thought we'd start. We know this conversation is going to go. Who knows where this is going to go? We know it's going to go deep, but we thought it would be fun to start with some favorite memories. So, Jen, can you take it away with favorite childhood memories with each other? And we did this unplanned, y'all. We don't know which memory is coming up. So
yeah, well, and that was
be surprised.
Yeah, that's the fun of it, right? Is having that raw. So, transparency's sake, we were talking, it's like, okay, what's the format of all of this? And what's the topic? So I think we each kind of, pick something. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about, especially because when we're talking about having real and raw conversations with mothers and daughters, it can immediately almost make you feel like, oh, this is going to be a really tense conversation, right? And I was like, well, but it doesn't have to be, because I have so many great and wonderful memories. And I have my favorite memory. And this is the memory that comes up often for me when I think about like my childhood and all this. And even my mom doesn't know, but I go back. We were living in Charlotte, and we were living in the apartment, the Colony Apartments. It was the Colony Apartments, right? And there would be so many nights that we would throw on YouTube.
Oh no.
And dance around the living room with our hairbrushes, singing like crazy. So, and mom was always the lead singer, and I was always like her backup person, right? In the YouTube. And I think it's escaping me, this song, but it was the Martin Luther
In the Name of Love.
In the Name of Love was probably one of my more favorite songs because of that memory. Because I just remember, like, it's just like in that moment everything was gone, and we just had so much fun together. So that was, when I think about my childhood, I think about my favorite memory. That memory is the one that constantly comes up for me.
Okay, well, already I'm all verklempt because that was my memory that I was going to talk about.
No way.
I don't believe. That's why I was like, what? And I was like, when we had In the Name of Love, and there was one night when we were both like, we got in the rhythm and we were dancing. And this was a time in my life. I was a corporate executive at Bank of America. We had moved across the country. We were 1,000 miles from any family. The only family we had around us was these other like uptight banking people. It was just you and me and them, and a lot of us had moved from Texas to North Carolina in this time frame. So we kind of had known each other, but we were feeling a little bit like we were on an island. And we'd sit there in that apartment dancing. And I remember one particular night where I just felt free, not so uptight, for the first time in a lot of my life. And I felt connected to you, like I might have been actually doing right by you, because one of the things I didn't talk a lot about in those days, you wouldn't know because you didn't need to carry this burden. You were like, what were you, 8 years old, 9 years old?
I was not very old.
Yeah. And you didn't need to carry the burden of me going, oh my God, am I screwing it up? Are we okay? Are we going to make it? Like, but that particular memory was magical. So that was my memory too.
Right. Wow. So, I mean, that's amazing. But I think, in that moment, something definitely happened, I guess, for both of us, apparently. I was not
Obviously.
anticipating that to be your memory as well, because that's the one that stood out so much to me, where
Yeah.
it was like I just felt so connected in that moment.
Yeah.
Like everything was
Yeah.
gonna be okay. So
Those little moments, man, those are treasures. So
Yeah.
cool, Jen.
yeah.
All
Well,
right.
now I gotta go to the next. I know I'm going to the next daughter because I want to hear the daughters first.
Yeah, good job.
I think mine is when we lived in Yonkers, New York, and we had a bunch of extended family come stay with us for Christmas. And it was one of our bigger Christmases that we had, because we're kind of a small family. It was my brother, my mom, and I. So when we had all the family together, there was just something about that was so magical. And that's probably why I'm so obsessed with Christmas, because of that association. So I would say that that's one of my fondest memories.
She is obsessed with Christmas. Mine's going to be kind of not your usual. Lauren was a very fearless child. And when she went to this small little private school for a period of time, I got a phone call from the school that Lauren and her friend had gotten in trouble, and they had been locked in a room, and they decided to break out of the room by climbing through the ceiling, to which they fell through the ceiling into the teacher's lounge. Not a call you would normally get. But I know she probably did get in some kind of trouble, but I was always so impressed by how fearless that she was. And I mean, she used to love to do those rock climbing walls. I remember that she was, were you like 9 or something? And she was next to the last rock at the top, and her body is shaking her, and she's like, trying to get to that last one. I mean, she just was this fearless little girl, and I just adored that about her.
Wow.
I've been to the top of a rock climbing wall the first time I ever made it to the top, and because I always was chickening out, and I was shaking like that. And it was how I learned to rappel, because I had 2 choices: either try to climb back down with no muscles or just go ahead and let the rappelling work, because I was anything but fearless. Well, I want to transition. So first of all, isn't it funny what sticks with us? There's an understanding in brain science that the limbic system, that it takes emotion to create a memory. And the stronger the emotion, the stronger the memory. The thing about that is oftentimes it's our worst memories too that make it, really stick. We can think about things like that. But when I think about the word fear, I think about my own experience as a mother. It was often driven with fear. And so, what that did was make me very controlling. So, and Jen, you might identify with this, and I may ask you to speak to it, but a lot of Jen's life, I was trying really hard to be perfect and not look bad as a mother, mainly to my mother. And so what I'm wondering, Jen, is like, when did you recognize that I was struggling as a mother? Like, were you in high school, or did it not hit you until much later? Because I know for me, it was a long time before I realized that my mother was a human too. Like, she was something else. And, there was a point at which Jennifer finally, I think, could see me as not something else. Does that make sense? Does that question make sense, Jen?
So this is what I'll say is, I don't know that it ever struck me out struck me as something where you were ever struggling as a mother. I don't think I ever thought that. I don't ever think, even like growing up, even when I got older, I didn't ever sit back and go, oh, my mom is struggling as a mom, right? Like,
not as a young person, I would think. No.
well, not even as an adult, honestly.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I don't know that I ever saw. Now, that being said, because there was two different questions there, struggling as a mom versus seeing you as a human. Now, I saw you as more human when you sat down and told me that Santa Claus didn't exist. So that was kind of my first moment of going, oh, mom's human and not this superhero person, because you just dashed everything about Santa Claus. And I say, yes, that's funny. And yes, I'm also being a little serious too.
Well, that was, I actually remember the moment we were in that same apartment in Charlotte and we were watching Major Dad. This will tell y'all when we were in Charlotte, if you remember that show. And they on that show said something about Santa Claus not existing. And this is what Jennifer turned and said to me. She said, wait a minute. They said Santa Claus doesn't exist. I know he exists because you told me he does, and you would never lie to me.
Ouch.
Oof.
And then I'm like, well, now how the hell am I supposed to tell her? And, we actually had a fair bit of issues with lying. Probably me lying to you as much as you lied to me, by the way, Jen.
Right. I was a big fat liar when I was a kid. I was a big fat liar when I got to be an adult too, for a long time. So
yeah. So, so Christine, Lauren, weigh in. What have you guys experienced around like the beginning of the dawning awareness of who each other is? And what I'm thinking about just is in the parent-child dynamic, it's sort of like the child is always under the parent. So they're always looking up to the parent. And it doesn't always necessarily, they don't always necessarily see things for how they are because of their vantage point.
Do you want to go first, Lauren?
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually really relate to what Jen said. I really relate to that. Like, I never saw my mom as struggling either. Like, it was kind of like life was coming at her and I just was like, she knows what she's doing. She's got this, like I remember I was thinking about this yesterday, a time when we lived in Maryland and we had no couch for like the longest time, for like a year, I think. And then my mom's like, there's a couch outside, we're bringing it in. And it was just like one of those moments where she was like, oh, things will just fall into place. And it just never seemed like a struggle. It just seemed like she just took it and just carried on and she would make it work. I mean, we were never hungry, we were never starving. She just somehow made it work. And even when we were alone a lot because she couldn't afford a babysitter being a single mom, even then I just felt like it was normal and that she just trusted me and that I was mature enough to do it. So I think that I still struggle today with the idea of her being human, and I have to check myself on that still. And my boyfriend even sometimes is like, yeah, I feel like you didn't have that like, oh yeah, mom is human kind of moment. And I was like, I've had those moments, but I still can get lost in the, oh, mom knows best. Mom take the lead. So so that's something I struggle with and something I have to really talk myself through, because I have to also humanize her. I have to give her a break, because sometimes I find myself not giving her a break because I'm like, you should know better. You should be better.
Mm-hmm. And we all now know who the parentified child is. Right? I will say that it wasn't like there weren't times like when Lauren had to, she was the older, it was her and my son, and she's the older one, that, some of responsibilities landed on her as a kid. And it's not like I didn't know that, but when you are just struggling to survive, like I would just go like, this is how I would, do it in my brain. I'd be like, okay, well, you know what? in Vietnam, women have children while they're out in the rice paddy working. They got to bundle it up and get back to work. Like, there are worse things in this world than this. And I don't have any support or way to change this. So I will just do the best that I can with a crappy situation. And it's not like you don't feel the weight of that. And the older I get, the more I realize how much that affected them. But at the time, when you're, I was a very young mom, and it was just about, I remember going around just feeling like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, I can't believe, like, it's working. We're still here. Everyone's still alive, But yeah, so this was, what was the question again? My brain is just gone.
Jen's the one who figured out what the question was.
what was it? What was it?
Right. Well, and it mostly because it kind of pertained into, struggling. When did we first see struggling as a
That's
mom?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Versus, and of course, I separated the questions, which was struggling as a mom versus seeing mom as human.
So when I realized, I will kind of manipulate the question a little bit, because I will say that when I realized that Lauren and I were enmeshed, was when it was probably about 8 years ago. And I think Lauren probably remembers the time frame too, because she had a boyfriend that was not that great, right? So the dynamic that would play out is that Lauren would call me. First, she would hide that there was a problem and like just put her big smile on and act like everything was fine, even though everyone's going, and then she would call me for that mother-daughter talk to kind of unload everything that's been happening. But if I said anything about the situation, she would attack me for judging him. And I knew you'd do this. And it would be, that whole conversation. So we had some of these going. And then I said, you know what? I think that you are smart enough, brilliant enough, intuitive enough to know the answers to your own questions. And I don't think that you need me in the way that this is playing out. So why, and we did talk about this, but the idea is like, how about you try to work on this issue, and you try to do what you know and feel is the right thing to do. And if you have a question, you can always come to me. I'm not unavailable to you. But we saw the dynamic of her not taking the initiative and being able to do things and make these decisions without coming to me, but then I would be the bad guy too. And it was just this whole dynamic. And when we did this, we both experienced this sadness and fear that meant we weren't going to be as close. That meant that somehow we were pulling away from each other instead of having the relationship evolve away from the parent and child dynamic, where like you have to ask mom Lauren used to actually get teased, like, well, you gonna go tell your mom now? Because she talked to me about everything. But it was important, because then if she doesn't get a chance to even make decisions or make mistakes, even in the sense of like realizing, oh, that decision wasn't the best, I'm gonna have to go back and make a different one, she's never going to get the confidence in herself. And it'll just be this constant need for me to figure it out, but then to push back against me. And that was a real turning point in our relationship. Wouldn't you say, Lauren?
Yes.
You remember that conversation?
I actually don't, but I totally remember I remember the feeling of like trying to dance on that line of, oh, I want to tell mom, I want to vent, but then I also don't want her to know too much, because then she'll form an opinion about this person. It'll be harder to be around her and this person. So I remember doing that. So I don't doubt what you're saying at all.
Which is actually the dynamic around abusive relationships, because we don't tell people what is actually happening, and we hide to protect the abuser because we know that people would be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So,
and they're going to change. We just need to, like, behind the scenes, try to change them, help them get better.
Yes, we can change them. For sure.
So, Christine, I think this is one of those places where you and I first connected. When I told the story of Jen's addiction on Warwick Schiller's podcast, and you reached out to me. But what struck me just then, it's that part where, as mothers, we had to do some of our own work because we're not perfect. And in my case, wasn't it? Not only was I not perfect, I hadn't really grown up in some ways. And it was my self-awareness work that freed me to be there for Jen the way I needed to be for her. And it strikes me that you didn't have that conversation with your daughter from nowhere. How did you come to be able to have that conversation with Lauren?
Well, I think that would go back to my mother, because my mother was a high level borderline personality disorder alcoholic. So you're talking about a hurricane that then you just pour gasoline on top of. So it was really important for me to be the opposite of that. So I really, in other words, very truthful, to maybe where like I shared too much truth with her when she was maybe too little. Do you know what I mean? Like trying to balance that. I don't know how well I did at that, but I always wanted to tell the truth. I always wanted to acknowledge her experience and her feelings, because if anybody the people listening know about pathological relationships and pathological people, you are an extension of them. So I was never allowed to have my own thoughts, feelings, or anything with my mother, because she just saw me as, she owned me. And they're very intuitive about how you're thinking, feeling, or anything. So you don't even feel like you even have your own thoughts. So being able to validate her, even if she thought that an experience or something that happened, her recollection was different, I always wanted her to be validated that her experience was her experience and her own. And I didn't have to make her experience mine. And I was okay if I looked badly in her view of what the experience was. And I could own that, and I could apologize for it. But I didn't feel like it made me less than to be honest and say, yeah, I probably didn't handle that great. You see people all the time. It's kind of like, we go back to the Brene Brown thing, right? Where you said, like, Brene Brown says to people, look, being vulnerable feels like you're shrinking and, melting and being weak. But to other people, it looks like courage and the truth. And it's like inspiring. And I think that's really important in our mother-daughter relationships, because I think parents oftentimes feel like if they admit there was something wrong, or that they did something that wasn't right, perfect, great, something that hurt the child, that somehow by admitting it, they're now vulnerable to attack, right? They now shrink in the child's eyes or in their own eyes. But there's nothing more beautiful and transformative than owning the things that weren't perfect and allowing the child to have their experience without having to try and fix it, or tell them like, well, yeah, I know that you felt that way, but really this is what was happening. So you don't, that's not your job. Your job is just to listen and to validate and to allow it to be what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's what we all aspire to, I think, but it's easier said than done. Lauren, what was it like for you in that conversation? Because did it feel like your mother had freed you or abandoned you or something else?
In the conversation about my boyfriend?
Yeah, because I would fear that Jennifer would think I was abandoning her, would be the example, is why I use that word. You know.
I think that it was more about like, oh shit, I am responsible for my life.
There you go.
I think that that's really what it was. It was like, oh wait, you're not going to guide me, even though you're trying to guide me. I'm rejecting it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think it was like very much like you're an adult now, you know, you have choices to make and no one can do it for you. And, you know, and I did make that choice, you know, I finally did relationship, luckily. Like, and it's funny how when you're in those relationships, how you feel like you need to build a case. And that's what I feel like I was trying to build. Like I needed a real reason and proof, and it needed to be like indisputable. And then finally that moment came where I was like, there it is. There it is. He actually was verbally abusive to me, called me names. Okay, now I can leave.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole I've got to justify and prove it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got that from me. I mean, you know, for sure.
I have it in spades too. I think it's pretty common, actually. You know, that Jen, that their story kind of reminds me of the moment where I did something similar with you in the middle of your drug addiction. And this was I told this story in depth on Warwick's podcast, but well, should I just tell the story since we have people we probably have people listening.
So.
I think
it's
I should tell the story. Because people are listening that wouldn't have, I don't want to make them have to go all over. So in this would be 16 years ago, because Jen just celebrated 16 years clean. I was on a business trip in DC, and she had bailed on having dinner with me the night before. She was married at the time, and we were expecting her to be moving to another apartment because they couldn't afford the one they were in. And I called her the next morning to check in on what had happened with her car, because it was theoretically a wreck that she had that caused her to bail on dinner. Couldn't get a hold of her. So almost got on an airplane to come home because I was going to get to be on the early flight that night, but got a strong intuitive message, go find her, and extended my rental car, changed my flight, and drove from DC to Winchester, and discovered through a series of events that there had been no wreck, that Jennifer and her husband had not even begun to move out of their apartment, and that she was on drugs again. And she had been in rehab once before. As I started recognizing what was going on, I asked Eric I found Eric, her husband, actually, I found him first, and said, take me to her. She was with his parents. And I actually had to threaten to call the sheriff to get him to do it. Yeah. I said, Eric, take me to my daughter, or I'm calling the sheriff now. So I followed them over to the house, and I saw the cycle in place. I could see that with him and his parents, and with Jennifer, I'm looking around going, they're going to wring their hands and nothing's going to change. These two kids are going to keep doing drugs forever until they die, if they don't keep things up. So I looked at Jen after about 30 minutes of sort of assessing the situation, and I said, Jen, I'm pretty sure that you are doing drugs because you have a lot of resentments for me, and I've earned every one of them. I said, I am ready to face what I did as your mother. But if you think killing yourself is going to destroy my life, take another look. I get teary every time I tell this story because I know it saved her life. I said, take another look, because my life is pretty good. And it's not my life you're destroying, it's yours. And I am strong enough to live without you. And I left not knowing if that was going to make any difference at all, but knowing that that was the only thing that could have made a difference. And I'll never forget, because I drove to Dulles Airport that night and found a massage therapist, those little 15-minute guys. And I dumped all of my emotions on him. I said, when it was like 30-minute massage or whatever that he did on me. And when I was finished, I just looked at him and I said, you better go clear yourself, because I just dumped a lot of shit on you. But the next day, Jen came back and said she was going to go to rehab. And then it was, I don't know, Jen, how many years later was it for you before you said, you told me that actually did make a difference for you?
I don't remember how many years later it was. I just, because I think it took me a while from that point, when I got into, back into rehab, I was still kind of unsure if that was going to be my life, if that's what I wanted, because I had already decided that I was going to die. And so I was like kind of already good with that. So I was like, I don't know if I can do this. So it definitely took me a little while for everything to kind of sink in and start looking back and saying, well, this was the pivotal moment, or this was a pivotal moment, or this, because it was like I was just trying to explore if I was even going to be willing or capable of living a life without, using something to cope with. I was like, I don't even know anymore. And I was so raw, and it took a long time for me to actually go, okay, I think this is going to be my life. And so it's God, it had to have been at least a year before I could look back on that moment and say that was a huge moment. With it all looking at, probably even longer than that, because I think it wasn't until I kind of moved away before I was able to kind of go, okay, I think this is my life now. This is what we're doing. Because I was even being clean for a while, I was still really struggling, I guess, emotionally. It wasn't very clear to me where my life was going. So it was a tough period. But there was a day when it's probably when I left and I was moving and I was on my way back to this area from Virginia, where I had the thought in the car of going, you're going to have to figure out how to be happy. And I think it's a choice. It's a choice, right? I feel like being happy is a choice, and I'm going to have to go figure out how to make choices that will lead to my happiness. And it was that day where I was like, I think I choose happiness. And that was another pivotal, moment for me. And that didn't happen until I had over a year clean and I had moved away, and I was like, I'm going to go choose to be happy. So, and then I could start looking back on everything else.
Well, this story was the story that had me reach out to Lynn, because when I listened to this story on Warwick's podcast, I was working exclusively in addiction, and I was working mostly with the people struggling with that addiction, but I also worked with families, and it was something that you saw all the time, where the child or even a husband or wife was doing this at a person. We call it drinking at someone, right? Or using at someone, because they haven't found better coping mechanisms or ways to deal with what they haven't been able to deal with. So, but trying to explain to a parent that the best thing that they can do to help their child is to take themselves out of the picture so that there's nothing to push against. I'm no longer going to do the dance with you, right? I'm going to pray for you. I will always, if you get clean, you want to go to rehab, whatever, I will be there, but I'm not doing this. Because what happens is that when you no longer have that place to put all of your anger and bitterness and resentments and all of that, there's no place. Now you're alone with your thoughts and your life, and your choices really are only affecting you. It can help the person have more clarity about what they're doing to themselves. It's not a punishment at all. And I think when I heard Lynn, like, all I thought was, wow, that is one of the first times I've actually watched someone step into that role, because the thoughts as a parent are, what if this is the thing I do that kills them? What if what if now she goes, well, if I don't have my mother, I might as well just, take a lot of drugs and die, because you never, but if you don't break the cycle, if you don't break that racket that's just constantly being run, there is no end to it. You have to reach for that lifeline.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I would say, one thing I wanted to bring up, and you guys can tell me what you think about this. A very, very good friend and mentor told me a long time ago. She said to me one day, she said, well, there is no guilt without punishment. And I didn't quite understand what she meant, but I'm going to make up names for them to protect them. But let's say it's my friend Sally and her son Bob, right? So Sally came from a very Italian Catholic family where you don't get divorced. And she had one son, Bob, and Bobby, let's say. And when Bobby was little, she got divorced. And so this big family thought, poor Bobby. Oh my gosh, poor Bobby. So Bobby got everything he ever wanted. He had doting grandparents. He had a huge family. His mother spent $50,000 back then on his grammar school education. She sent him to the best school. She did all these things because he was poor Bobby. And what happened was that no matter how great everything was, he absorbed that identity that something was wrong with him, that he was poor Bobby, and he struggled to ever grow up. He got into drugs. It's like, because there was all this guilt, and he was being parented by the extended family from a place of guilt and poor him. He never got to get the sense of seeing himself as complete and capable and able. So you have to really be very aware of when you're parenting from guilt, because it's really destructive. It doesn't do what you think it's doing. Like, you think, oh, I'm going to rush in and like prove to my child how much I love them by doing this because there is lack here. There's things there, but that it doesn't translate that way. And I think that that's something that is really important.
Well, and I have, so Lauren said something really important where it was like, oh my God, I have to take responsibility for my life now. Right. And in that moment, back to this moment, to what you're talking about, to that moment when mom kind of said, okay, you're responsible for your life now, and took a step into that. It did kind of shake me. Now, I still had to make a lot of choices after that. I could have gone just as easily the other way.
Sure.
Right. And that's not the choice that I made, but I did have to start taking more responsibility for my life. And I'll tell you, from my perspective, my whole life, I got away with poor Jen, and it made it really easy because I could get out of just about anything with poor Jen. And I pulled on those heartstrings with other people, with my mom, with so many people in my life, to get my way, to get out of trouble, to get out of people being angry. I could always shed a few tears and make people feel sorry for me. And it really served me very well in the poor Jen to feel sorry for myself, to continue doing what I was doing. Right. So, Bobby.
Well, I'm thinking back to how many times I rescued you up until then. Like, we had to get pretty serious before I recognized my role in the poor Jen game, because you almost didn't graduate high school because you got caught with cigarettes. Remember, I just like held, instead of saying, hey, figure it out, don't smoke again or you're not graduating. I didn't want to inconvenience myself to have you not graduate. So I made sure you graduated. And we had story after story after story. Like, I came rushing in. I wouldn't call myself a helicopter mom. I would call myself a trampoline mom. I would run under as she was falling with a trampoline going, let's not make it hurt too much.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
this is where we ended up, partially because I hadn't wanted you to own your life. And I was having very real pressure on me to continue to rescue you. I sat with I remember talking to somebody at one of the ski lakes I was at. It was the father of the ski coach I was working with. And I told him a little bit of your story. And he looked at me with all seriousness and said, I believe I would get my daughter out of that situation. And you were a grown ass woman married. You really can't do that. But there was a part of me that thought, should I? Am I screwing up if I don't?
Right. Well, and there was a part, and this is what I'll say is following that, where I don't think you were trying to get me out of that situation, but you were trying to get me out of that situation and sending me out of the state to another rehab when I was already in a rehab.
Yeah.
And I actually, and this was probably one of my personal turning points, where it was like, I could leave the state and like go to this really fancy rehab or whatever, or I could do something different that I've never done before, which was face all of my problems.
Right. Because, by the way, that part of the game, back to Christine, what you said, that was my guilt going, okay, I'm going to send her to the best, most expensive place I can find, because then I can feel like I'm washed and absolved of having done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And Jen fortunately stood up, because I don't think that rehab would have been right for you.
Well, and I, for some reason, like, I knew it was just like, I need I through whatever mess that I need to stick through and really face it. And, I did, and it was one of the best things. Now, eventually I did move on from that situation, but I moved on because that chapter had closed in my life. I wasn't running away from that. But, kind of back to this whole dynamic of, for me, of just waiting for you to swoop in. I'm sure Lauren can, attest to this. When you're growing up and you have your mom and all and mom knows best, right? And that is a lot of how I felt too, where mom just kind of knows best, and we lean on mom. We have those conversations. It's like, it just became part of the norm. It just became part of what we do. Is, you just need to tell me what to do with my life. I screw it up. You come in, you kind of, tell me some really good things, and either I listen or I don't, or I fight against you. But at least, you have to tell me, and now I'm going to do things, drink at you, or just do things, against you. It doesn't even have to be about drinking or using drugs. It's just is like, well, I'm going to show you that everything that you're saying, it's this weird, really weird, messy dynamic. I'm sure that Lauren can attest to a little bit.
And I want to hear what Lauren says, but I will say you brought something up really important there, which is unhealthy ways of getting your needs met by creating problems and drama and chaos, so that the person that you have the issues in the relationship with will come swooping in, and that's how you're experiencing love. And I think that there was an aspect of that with Lauren and I too, right? That where it would be this big problem, and then I would come running, and I would always be available, and then Lauren would feel seen and heard and loved. But then we have to keep creating these things to bring that in. But Lauren will also attest to, because I learned about the no guilt without punishment, doesn't mean I didn't still do it, but they always had they were the only kids that had consequences when they screwed up, because they would always come to me and go, nobody else got grounded. It's like, well, you're grounded. So go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that actually I feel like trauma and like creating just these scenarios and these situations definitely became like a love language almost, like within itself. And I totally relate with that, like trying to, it's almost like the intensity aspect being confused for intimacy. And it's like the more intense the situation is, the more drama there is, and you swooping in, and now it feels like, oh, we've made a connection here. And it felt like if I don't have that, if I don't have this drama going on, because we grew up with trauma, you know, like horrible neighbors, horrible teachers, family members, moving around all the time, financial situations, my stepdad, like things like that were always based around like, oh no, how are we going to get through this? And we really leaned on each other through those things. So yeah, for me, I feel like there is a subconscious part sometimes that wants to go, okay, how do we get close to mom? Oh, there needs to be something going wrong in order for mom to come forward. And that's connection. And I know better because I never feel better after that. Like when we have that connection part, like it doesn't feel good afterward. I actually feel worse afterward, like a emotional hangover.
Yeah. Yeah. But that was definitely how I received love. I loved when mom came in. You know, I did. Like she would just come in and take care of all of my problems for me. It was amazing. She's like, well, you just need to move here. Yes, I do. Like, yes, I do. You know, and it was great. It was both toxic, and that was how I saw it, because I think for me, and this is part of the hard conversation, right? Where she was a very busy woman. She was always there for me though, right? Like, but at the same time, it was like she would swoop in. That's how I really knew that we were connected and loved, right? Because the rest of it was just going through your normal daily life. Like she would come, she'd pick me up from school, we'd eat dinner, we'd, you know, and I think that's why that was one of my favorite memories was in that moment we were genuinely connected without it being anything else outside of we were connected in that moment. And we had a lot of little moments. That's the one that stands out to me, but we had a lot of those too. And so it is kind of like what Lauren is saying, is we're trying to recreate that connection, but if we're not getting it in the healthy ways, then we're going to get it in the unhealthy ways. Right. And when we get older, it looks very different. And I think when I started growing up into high school and out, it's like I'm looking for that connection, but it seems so far away from me, because she's like, okay, you're out of the house now, go live your life.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, wait, I'm still the 8-year-old girl that wants to dance in the living room.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I was projecting on you what I wanted to do myself, because I got married at 18 and left home and had much less to do with my parents. I stayed with them. I was in the same town, but I wasn't, I was very independent. And I kind of thought at 18, you were going to basically be gone. Like, I might see you once a month or something at best. And
holidays and
yeah. And, I did end up moving across the country and not seeing my folks as much as but you and I've taken a different path where you've gotten to be closer to me.
Yeah, because I forced it on you because I made you say that was not my story. It was not what I wanted.
Yeah. Well, what for us, another element I want to go into in a minute, but I want to go back to something Lauren said, because I feel like that's a distinction I'm going to want to at the end.
Can't hear you. You broke up.
Oh, you broke out for just a second.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we're going to pretend like that didn't happen and say that again.
For the first time ever, it says my internet connection is unstable. I've never had that here. So what I was saying about Lauren said something really important. The feeling you get when the connection isn't from a good place isn't good. And that's a signal that something's up. I think that's really worth calling out.
Yeah.
I don't know if Lauren remembers oh, I'm sure Lauren remembers this. I don't remember the exact details, but I do know that this is probably within the past couple of years. There was something happening where things were playing out between Lauren and I, where we were getting in these fights and like having arguments. And my perspective was like, there was nowhere I could go in these conversations because it started to feel like this was coming up as some, feelings of hurt or anger that Lauren had that maybe she hadn't fully become conscious of, and they were coming out in these ways that felt like there was nowhere for me to go with this, right? Like I was just getting like peppered. And I remember saying to her something along the lines like, I'm not going to do this with you. If you go to this place where, nothing I say or do is right and everything, then I'm just going to hang up until, we can calmly talk about what has happened. And I think that this is a really important part of healing, because it's not us butterflies and, rainbows, that people don't do things on purpose, but things can bubble up in ways that aren't exactly the best, healthy, most calm way of talking it out. And that was so hard for me to maybe hang up the phone or say that, because Lauren and I, one thing that's true about both of us, we cannot be happy or calm if we know the other one is upset with us, right? Like, and so being able to do that and go, okay, I can't do anything in this box, so I'm just not going to do this, was so hard. And it took a few days, I think, for us to be able to come back and really talk about it. Do you remember that, Lauren?
Mm-mm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So apparently wasn't as traumatizing for her.
It sounds familiar. I'm just trying to remember what it was about.
I don't remember what it was about, but you were mad at me. I wasn't doing it right. I wasn't doing anything right. And I'm not listening, and I was trying my best, and it was just very animated. So I think that when you work on things in the way that you communicate, because communication is everything, that you have to have patience with both sides. You have to have patience with yourself and patience with the other person. And if you feel like you're sliding into those old ruts, those old, like everybody knows what the other one's going to say, because we're back to that argument, we're back to that way of relating, that we have to agree that we're going to tap out in that moment, right? Like, okay, this is going back to the old pattern. Let's take a minute. Let's take a day. Let's take whatever we need to like get back to where we can sit down and talk about this again, no matter how many times it takes, so that we break that old pattern. Because that's really important. And that's really, even what you did with your conversation with Jen was what you did. There was a pattern that was going between the two of you.
Yeah.
You broke it.
Yeah.
And the thing about breaking the pattern is it opens up a whole bunch of space in the relationship to be able to be different and relate differently.
It's making me think about, we're sort of talking about let's call it fights that we have with our daughters. I guess we actually do have fights with our daughters. Jen, in what year was it, Jen? About 2016, 2017, I actually asked her to come work with me in my business.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I only laugh because it's just so open. Like I believe it looks like it works really well for you guys, but like it's so laid with like landmines.
Oh,
well,
like,
it didn't. It did,
okay.
and then it didn't
So
work. We hit those landmines.
We're about to tell you
Say
about.
that.
I'm going to tell you about one of the landmines because one of the things that we decided would be good for me to do is videos that I could do for the coaching clients, you know, that I was working with. I was saying the same thing over and over again to a lot of them. So it's like, let's record a few videos so that you can say, hey, go watch my video on this thing and it'll help you. So we're out. I'll never forget it. We were at the retreat center over at Mystic Waters, the place where I now bring some of my clients in. And I wasn't doing a good job. And Jennifer said, wait a minute, you're not being very real or something like that. And I made a face of frustration. And it was at myself. This was not directed at Jen in any way, shape, or form. Actually, I was appreciative that she had the courage to say, hey, that ain't good enough, you know.
She was performing, and I just wanted her to be authentic.
Yeah.
And
so she's like, cut.
This is not you.
Yeah. And so she just did the whole nice way. Yeah. But I made a face. And the next thing I know, Jen is gone. She like ran into the retreat center. And I'm standing out in the parking lot going, well, what the hell just happened? Like, I must really be screwing up. And so then I'm like, well, do I go in? What do I do? Because I thought this was all about me, of course, but we were in a pattern. And the pattern was what we ended up calling mom face. So evidently, when I made the face at myself, Jen, you can pick it up from here. What did that face mean to you?
You know, she had that typical mom face that happens when like all of a sudden, like you're that little girl again. I don't care how old you are. And it sent me in. And here's the thing, consciously, I was aware that it had nothing to do with me, but it was so ingrained. That face was so ingrained. It sent me in tears. And I didn't want to make it a thing, even though it had no choice but to be a thing because I ran away. And in the bathroom crying.
And she's crying in the bathroom, and I'm standing in the parking lot going, what happened?
And she's like, I was like, it was just, that mom face just hit me out of the blue. And so I had no control over that moment of what my reaction was. And it was like, I knew it wasn't personal. I knew it wasn't about me, but I still had to run away and go hide in the bathroom and cry. Because it was just so, that moment was just so ingrained. And now we can laugh at it, right? We were actually, through that landmine though, we were actually able to talk about the mom face, right? Yeah. And now it looks a lot like, oh, mom, you're giving me that face. And it'll be like, and it won't even be, you're giving me that face. It's just like, oh, there it is. There's a mom face. And I can just say that, right? And it doesn't send me over the edge. Because we hit that, and then we were able to talk about it. I said, well, this was my experience of what just happened, was like, you were really, frustrated, Matt. So we had plenty of our landmines that did happen. And we had a lot of really difficult conversations that we had to have because things weren't working for a while. And a lot of that not working, I'll say, was, I don't want to say it was just on my end, because we all have responsibilities, right? But I think it wasn't working, and I had to go do some things, because we were hitting so many childhood things for me. The resentments that would pop up, some of them that I wasn't even aware of, that we had never talked about because I wasn't aware of them until we were working so closely together. And not to mention, not just working together, but she's also my landlord, right? She's also like, we are very intertwined into a lot of complicated dynamics here. And when that first started happening, or we were first kind of approaching this transition into these very complicated dynamics, it got really hard. And, there was a point at which things were really clear, because she had her dad, my grandfather, was not doing well. And I don't think we were communicating as openly as we needed to about the future of what all this meant for us. for the business, because this was my livelihood. I was working for her as a W-2. This was my livelihood. This was how I paid the bills. And so I felt like some of that was in jeopardy a little bit, even though I was like, I really hope that my landlord doesn't kick me out.
Yeah.
More complicated. But yeah, we had to have a lot of really, really difficult conversations. And we did hit a lot of landmines that included having to restructure some things.
Yeah.
But we had to have the conversations.
Yeah.
Right.
The hard conversations, the ones that not only just about how she pissed me off in this moment, but how she pissed me off when I was 5 years old.
That's true.
I wanted to ask a question for the moms, because I think that it takes a lot of emotional strength to be able to hear our grievances and sit with them and process them and hold space for us, because not a lot of parents do that. Parents can get easily defensive and explain themselves and, maybe even discount the child's experience. So, or, chalk it up to, oh, you didn't have it bad. People out there have it so much worse. Are you kidding me? And I feel like you both really hold space, and maybe that was sort of learned over time, but I'm just curious, how do you frame it in your mind to where you're able to hold space and not take it personally?
Well, I would say
question.
Great question,
for me, Laura. I can't go back in time and fix and change the things that I would like to, or the things that hurt you or weren't good for you. But the least I could do is empathize, understand, and be present for you sharing them, so that you don't feel like you now have to convince me that they happened as well.
Yeah.
And I would say that Lauren, I think one of the things that makes it hard for Lauren to share things with me isn't that it's not available to her. It's that I think that Lauren also feels very protective of me. And so when she has feelings that of maybe anger, frustration, or hurt or anything, I think she's conflicted, because part of her wants to rail at me and tell me what it is, and all that, and then the other part of her wants to protect me from that too. And that can make it hard for her to that, so maybe then there's these weird arguments that I have no way out of, because that's how it's showing up.
Yeah, my displaced anger starts to come out, and it's like, wait, you're that angry over this, or that upset with me over that? Like, yeah. And full transparency, I'm still working with a therapist through that, because I think you're spot on, Mom. I think it totally is. There's a part of me that feels protective and feels like, and also I think there's that element of like, well, she should know better than this, so if I am upset or I don't agree with you on something, it's like, she should know better, but who am I to tell her? And then it's like this back and forth of still feeling like the kid in this.
Wow. That is the dynamic, isn't it? Like that belief they should know better, and how dare they, or who am I? And we get caught going kind of back and forth. I know for myself, you asked the question, how not to take it personally. I wrote a whole book about this, because I did take things personally. I spent a lot of my life thinking everything was about me. And, so as Jen and I started going through this part where we were trying to learn to work together, I did at times take it personally, and yet strived to treat her as much as possible like an adult, with the power with dynamic as opposed to power over. And there were times when I was like, I don't know what I just did, and then she would be mad. And I remember another day we were working up at the pavilion overlooking the big lawn and lake at Mystic Waters, and she has very accurate arms. She threw her water bottle and hit the post very accurately, because she always had a very accurate arm. But I was like, what the hell did I just do? And so it was sometimes confusion. And then there were just times when I had to realize, nothing is ever personal. If I can just remember that, but it's so funny because like Jen was talking about the mom face trigger. Right after this happened with her, I went to the grocery store and there was this guy in the grocery store, just the produce guy. And he made a face that looked like my mother. And it was about the third time walking by him when I was inside, like unconsciously just kind of going, what's his friggin' deal? Kind of realizing, oh, that's just his face. And it just reminds me of this other face. And it shows you how unconscious our triggers can be.
Yeah.
Right. And so back to your question, to not take it personally was actually a conscious effort on my part. Like I had to draw on all the self-awareness work I've done. And I started working on myself. I was truly, I did a TED talk on this. I truly was a raging bitch. And my self-awareness work started kind of around the year. I'd say, these things always happen in droves, but I would say when I started doing the artist way in 1999, that was the kind of turning point when I started saying, Lynn, you may have something to do with the state of your life. And it's time to start owning that. And I'll say I'm still working on not taking things personally, including, when Jen and I occasionally cross things up, although we don't cross up nearly as much as we did before. We've had a lot of those conversations now.
Yeah. Well, because it was getting to the point where I was throwing things. And I'll tell you what she did to real accurately. I'll tell. Well, I was pretty upset because she was like yelling things at me, like, "I believe in you, Jen. I know you can do this."
How dare she?
But at the time,
it's
true. And that's what made me throw the water bottle, was because she was like, "I believe in you." And in my head, though, because of like my filters and where I was at with myself, I heard that as a condescending insult, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
somebody's on your page down there.
I already know how to interpret that.
I believe in you. I know you can do this. Right. And like, I think in her mind, she was being a good mom. And in my mind, I'm like, you're being a condescending bitch. But that's what made me so mad.
I had forgotten that's what it was. But yeah, no wonder I was sitting there going, what'd I do?
You're like, I was complimenting you. But I'm sure Lauren can also, she's shaking her head in resonance with what I'm saying of how that can be perceived when you're in a particular state of mind. And why throwing things may be necessary.
Well, Jen, so what did you do? Because you did go do some reflection, because what started happening soon after that was I noticed that when I would ask for things, like Jen and I were like going back and forth with, web design and newsletter, and she produces my podcast, and I would ask her for a status on something or ask her for something. And kind of prior to the bottle throwing incident, I would get sort of this grudging answer. And then it started becoming more like working with somebody I really wanted to work with. Like, oh, let me go check. Let me find that out. Let me get it to you. Let me, it was sort of all of a sudden we were adult to adult, instead of me feeling like I was the unwitting parent to a child I didn't want to be a parent to, if that makes sense. So what did you do?
Well, I can't really, we don't have enough time to explore everything that I did to get to that point, right? So I can only say in a nutshell of like, what did it look like? Because, well, for me, it had a whole lot to do with like all of my insecurities, right? You would ask me a question, would follow up, and I felt like I wasn't doing a good job. I felt like that was a hit against me in terms of, oh, I should have already, you're paying me, so I should have already had that in front of you, or whatever it was, right? It was like, some of it was my insecurities. Some of it was like, all of it was my insecurities. Let's just put it that way. So what I ended up having to actually do in a nutshell is really get another person to like help me explore what those insecurities were. So whenever she would say something to me, I wasn't taking it, I wasn't hearing it through my insecurity lens, right? It was like, oh, she's just asking me like, what's the status on this? Or, can we change this? Or because I felt like everything before that was not good enough. I felt not good enough. And so I had to really work through that. And that was, that's the conversation where it's like, it took a lot of work to get to that point and some restructuring, right? Like I had to stop being a W-2. Honestly, I had to go to be an independent contractor. And then it was like, now we're same dynamics, I'm doing the exact same thing, except it's just laid out a little bit differently. So I'm able to show up like that. But you know what? I would love to go back and hear, because I know Lauren had some thoughts. Maybe I'm hoping she'd be willing to share that resonance with the I can see where you're coming from in the throwing water bottles when mom is just trying to tell you how great you are.
Yeah, I think that what would come up in me is like, mom is well, I guess what I was wondering with you is, did you feel like it was abnormal for your mom to do that? Like, because I know that there was a change in your guys' dynamics. So did you suddenly feel like, what the hell's this sort of cheerleading, encouragement, over the top, whatever?
Well, I definitely think that she was always a cheerleader, but she would not like sit there and go, Jen, I really believe in you, even though she really believed in me, right? She wouldn't say those things necessarily out loud, maybe because she didn't ever feel like she needed to say those things out loud before, until she saw me kind of, I don't know, I guess spinning out of control mentally. And this is, by the way, I had like years, this has had nothing to do with addiction. This years clean. I feel like I'm a mature adult, except I wasn't a mature adult anymore, right? So yeah, I do actually feel, now that you asked that question, I'm like, yeah, I don't think that I felt like that was a change. Like, why are you saying these things to me?
Yeah, I can identify with the feeling that you had. I don't have a water bottle incident per se.
Right.
There's a dent in my car, but
yeah, that was
oh well, there's a story there.
that was anger in general.
Right.
But I know that Lauren, see, the way I perceive Lauren to take that is Lauren taking, I believe in you, is now there's the pressure of an expectation you have of me. Just one more thing that I can fail at.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
To a degree. Yeah. Or it would just be overthinking it. Honestly, it would be like, she wouldn't need to say that if it were true.
Right. Well, okay. So it's a lot I think to me, when I really break it down, it's a whole lot like people, which I understand this because now that I'm like an adult, like I can see why we do this, but like telling someone that they have so much potential, right? I think it's almost, even though like I know how we mean it, but when you really break that down, it's like, so are you saying that I'm not actually like the best version of myself? Because even if I feel like I'm I'm doing the best that I can right now, and saying I have so much potential is kind of telling me that I'm still not good enough.
Yeah.
Right. So like people used to tell me that all the time, and I took it as like, so am I not good enough? Like, because I feel like at this present moment, I'm seriously doing the very best that I can. So by you saying that to me tells me like, so when I hear like, I believe in you, I think at that moment, it felt like you were saying you have so much potential, and I still felt not good enough.
Yeah.
Does that make
you
sense?
know, that's, if there's anything that can get people, it is that everyone, I don't think I've ever worked with a single client that didn't somewhere have that not good enough. And if you put that lens on, everything else comes in a little bit like a funhouse mirror. It's not a clear reflection of who you are. It's like warped, because you can take everything the wrong way. Because you don't personally feel good enough, or you feel like you're somehow missing the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
There's
I
a lot of
understand.
nodding heads.
Well, I was going to say the potential thing, I totally understand, because I remember when people would say that to me for the longest time, it would feel heavy after. I would be like, ugh, what do I do with
Ugh,
this? Like it, I
yeah,
know it's complimentary, but it's like a pressure. And again, it's like, well, I don't have direction or clarity of what I want to do. And now you're saying that I have this potential and I'm now trying to find it. And yeah,
yeah,
it's especially if you feel like you are doing so much, it can
yeah.
definitely play on you. Like
Well, and
this is all I have right now. You want more?
you say it feels like
Right.
you want more. It's pressure for more, or that, heaven forbid, I'm going to waste something. I hate
Yeah.
waste, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're telling me I could have a wasted life, or I could, But the whole thing, it all comes down to the strangest things, like pressure. Like Jennifer was feeling pressure just from me asking her for something. Hey, where is that thing you did for me? And it's just a simple request. I don't remember because I have a terrible memory on these things. Where
Right.
is it? And for her, it would be like, you're not good enough to have.
Well, right. Well, she would ask me to do the things that I had already done over again because she forgot that I did it. And I
It
was
took her
like,
a while to realize that.
right.
I
It
was
did take me a
forgetting.
while to realize that, because she's like asking me for things. I'm like, but we've already done this. So, like, was that not because I thought when we had the conversation about this that you were happy with my work, but now you want me to do it again, all because she just forgot that we had already done it because her memory sucks. So,
Well, and wouldn't you say that because there was the old dynamic and story there, the brain went right to the story instead of, let me ask some questions, right? Let me,
right.
100%.
we did this before. Is there something about it that you didn't like? Is there some new, but it just goes straight to the story. And that's why when both people are open to actually like changing the dynamic, it helps because we can help the other one get back on track, right? But a lot of times nobody understands what's happening, right? Because one person's gone off the rails.
Yep.
I don't know what happened over here. I'm trying to catch up, and there's a whole breakdown. So sometimes you just got to ride that wave until you figure it out without engaging in the old patterns.
Right. Well, now I ask more questions.
She's so much better at it. But the thing about those patterns is they do transcend our relationships with our mothers and daughters. In other words, the very pattern that Jennifer and I had is also carries, into other relationships, because we see the same triggers. It's just like the guy at the grocery store having the mom face of my mom, and it was affecting me, and he had no intent whatsoever to affect me. He just had a permanent scowl on his face.
He had resting bitch face.
It was a male with a resting bitch, a bitchy resting face, or whatever they call that. But yes, that's exactly what happens. Is these patterns, I can't tell you how many times I'm having to unwind a parent-child dynamic in a work situation where people are hearing what the boss is saying. You remember Jennifer said she had to get off being a W-2 because that makes me not her boss, but more like her. I don't know what I am when I'm a contractor, but it's different. Like she's a client, or I'm her client then, instead of her boss, and it changes the dynamic. But sometimes I tell people, treat your boss like a client, and it changes everything, because they get out of that parent-child dynamic that we have sometimes even with our bosses. So you can imagine for Jennifer and I, bless her heart, she had 3 layers. She had me as her actual mother, then she had me as her boss and her landlord.
It was
And you guys
complicated.
did really well.
It took a lot for us to get to where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
I would like to throw something in here because I really wanted to get this out and make sure that I wanted to be able to give people some tools to be able to use in these situations, because you can have the intellectual understanding and see it play out, but then you can get stuck. And this is one of my favorite tools because it puts you back into being in control of the way you're showing up and breaks the pattern. And it's 3 different stages to it. The first one is called mirror. The second one is called empathize. And the third one is validate. And how this looks, I used to use this a lot in the groups that I would do at the treatment center for addiction. So because I would say, okay, so you're here for 30 days and you're going to go through this entire process of self-exploration and therapy and understanding, and you're going to feel great. You're not going to be using anymore. You're going to get healthy. And then you're going to go back home. And when you go home, what you don't fully understand is that those people, the last time they saw you, they were pouring you into a cab on the way to the airport, on the way to treatment. So they didn't go along the line, this whole treatment process with you. So when you go home, you're so excited, and you might be like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be sober and clean and live this new life. And you could be met with some very cynical
resting bitch face.
Yes, there could be a lot of resting bitch face.
It's
right?
not a resting bitch face. It's just a bitch face. Let's be clear.
Yeah. And people could say things like to you, like, yes, well, we heard all that before. Okay. That could be a real trigger moment, right? Because it could go right into the old story of, resentments and everything. Here I did this huge thing in my life, and these people don't even support me. I don't even get validated for that. And then now you've got that feeling of inside of you. You've got a distance between the person that's in your life. Maybe it's a sister, mother, whatever. But if you do something like a mirror, empathize, and validate, what that looks like is say, okay, so what you hear is, I'll believe it when I see it. We've been here before. So you mirror that person. So let me see if I understand. What you're saying is that I have before said that I was going to get sober and be healthy, and that didn't happen. Yeah, that's right. It didn't happen. And you lied all the time. Okay. So you're saying that I lied, and that really was hard for you. Is that what you're saying? That I lied and I said that I was going to be sober and I wasn't? Yes. Okay. I can understand. You empathize. I can understand why you would feel this way, right? I can understand it. I did do those things. That did happen. And now you validate. If I were you, I would probably feel the same way. And then you have to take yourself out of it. In other words, you're not doing this as some kind of parlor trick to like gain control of the conversation or, some chess move. This is so that you can walk away and not have picked up that judgment about, we heard this before. Because if you own it, nobody, I used to say, anybody seen 8 Mile? Anybody seen that movie with Eminem?
Oh yeah.
Right. Brilliant scene where he's going to have like a wrap off, right? And he's the only white guy there, and he's terrified. And what happens is like the guy he's going against is just brutal. He's going to get shredded. So what he does is he goes out there and he owned every single thing that guy could have ever said about him. He said it about himself first. He owned it all and made it his, so that there was no place that the other guy could come at him, because he had no vulnerability, because he owned it all. It's brilliant. You think that it means that you're agreeing about you're a bad person. It doesn't. You're just acknowledging that someone else could have a different experience around what's happening. And by letting them know that you see and hear and understand that, that can also go really far in taking that tension away, because when we get into arguments, everyone's waiting to just throw their piece back. There's a big wall between you and we're lobbing balls over it, right? Yeah. Because no one's listening, because we're just waiting to like give our side. But this makes us stop too. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to argue or give evidence or anything. I just want to stop for a minute, and I want to really hear what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, and without having to change it, and to just acknowledge, like, yeah, I guess, you know, if I was you, I'd probably feel the same way. And it takes away so much of the energy behind it.
That's a brilliant tool.
Yeah, it's a great
I
tool.
love that. I love that.
No, that was a great tool. Lauren, what's your go-to tool? Putting you on the spot. I'm sorry. I'm allowing you the opportunity to immediately use your tool.
Well, actually, it's funny when you were saying about like how your mom would say something to you or email you or whatever, and how you would interpret it. Like, my big thing that I'm trying to really incorporate is the, like, recognizing, like, what's the facts? What are the facts here? Right? Oh, an email was sent saying, did you do this thing? And how am I saying it in my head when I'm reading it? Did you do this thing? Right? And that's usually like, oh, well, Lauren, you're adding an inflection there that isn't there, right? It's simply, did you do that? It's just a question. And if someone else asked you this, would you feel the same way? So, you know, because we're sometimes applying like, oh, well, this person thinks this way, and we're mind reading, right? So it's kind of like catching myself when I go into those cognitive distortions, as they call it, right? Like mind reading, when I'm catastrophizing. Like, how many of us, when we hear like, oh, the boss wants to see you, and you're like, I'm in trouble. You have no idea what's going to be said, but you just immediately go into, I'm in trouble. I don't think I've done anything wrong, but they probably found something that I've done wrong. So yeah, trying to catch myself when I do that. So the cognitive distortions list is like huge for me. Another thing that I do is, especially because we were talking about like the codependent relationship mom and I have, something that I have learned to catch myself in pretty much daily is when I have a problem and I want to call mom. It's like a knee-jerk reaction to be like, let's call mom and vent, right? And then we get stuck in this pattern again and again. It's exhausting, and then we're on the phone for hours wasting time, and then afterward I don't, like, sure, there's a little relief, but not really. It doesn't last. And so I feel like holding back from calling mom, being mindful of that, and actually going and sitting with myself or journaling or finding my own coping strategies has been really, really helpful. And also recognizing when I'm calling mom about something negative or to complain versus, am I calling mom anytime about something positive, something helpful? I want that to be more so than the complaining and the negativity. So what's my ratio is what I'm constantly.
Oh, that's good.
That's awesome.
Because mom, I use as a dumping ground for a lot of things.
I think moms are, I thought that was, besides the eyes in the back of our head and the third hand to carry all the dishes back to the kitchen, I thought that was one of our jobs.
Yeah.
Right?
I did too. I was there for it until I was like beaten to submission by, you know, it just became so heavy to constantly be getting that. And I didn't feel like it was helping. It was like just stirring the pot, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And mom, you did a good thing too. Like I would start to recognize when my mom would sort of like check out a little, or she'd be like, she wouldn't give me much. And I was like, okay, this is boring. I gotta get off the phone now. Like, you're not giving me anything.
Yeah. That's helpful.
I'm done with you. Thank you.
We're not throwing no more gasoline on that fire.
Yep, exactly. Or or she would even, there was a period of time, and Mom, you're going to be reminded and you're probably going to start doing it again, where she would kind of cut me off, where she would be like, I gotta go. I have to attend to this thing over here.
I'm
and
going
I knew
to empty the dishwasher.
Yeah, I knew it was an excuse. I'm like, Mom, you take your phone everywhere with you to, we've had conversations while you're doing laundry, while you're feeding the chickens. Like, so I know that that's BS, but on a certain level, I also know that that is what I need. So I do accept it. I'm like, we've reached that point.
Yeah.
Mom needs to get off the phone with me.
Yeah. Those are helpful.
Yeah.
Those are very good. Those are very good tools though, those awarenesses. Jen, what is one of your go-to tools? And then I'll share one.
Well, this is mostly for like when I'm in like the immediate reaction, if I get, cause this is where I struggle the most, is, when I'm confronted with something and I don't know how to respond and my brain kind of flatlines for a minute. And then like that's my biggest struggle. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. And my go-to for that particular thing, that sometimes I remember it and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just flatline and like, but when I remember it, it's good, is I just ask can you tell me more about that? Very simple, very easy to remember. I don't have to do anything else. Can you tell me more about that? Not because, and this is what I tell other people when I tell people how to use this tool, not because I actually care what they have to say. I just need my brain back in that moment, right? Like, I need a minute. And I know it's going to take them a minute to tell me more about what they mean, because so I'm like, okay, this is going to give me at least 5 to 10 minutes to kind of like gather myself can you tell me more about that? But yeah, because I need about 5 to 10 minutes to get my brain back, because my immediate reaction is usually not good. It looks a lot like throwing water bottles.
I feel like I relate to you on that. It's like either we react and it's really not good and it's like, oh no, I want to take that back, or it's just I don't have because I'm overthinking and I know that I don't react well in those situations, now I have nothing.
Yeah,
flatline.
Yeah.
Flatline. Mine hard-earned was wanting to be able to get to a place of curiosity when something's coming at me that I'm not expecting, like, Jen, why did you throw the water bottle? And be curious as opposed to pissed. But to get there, I've learned I have to assume positive intent. And, it's no secret because I wrote The Elegant Pivot, the book about that. But to see that it's not personal and that there's a reason somebody's doing something and it's not necessarily about me is really helpful to get to curiosity for me. And it applies almost everywhere I go, but it's really, really hard to do. But, most people really don't get up in the morning trying to screw up your day. Like, Jen, I knew when we were going through our stuff that you weren't getting up in the morning trying to make life hard on us, or make life hard on me, or make my lack of good memory be a problem. So if I could, after the first hit, there's always that first thought, which is usually not good. My second thought, I try to have be assuming positive intent, just so I can be curious and say, well, what is going on? If I don't like that, what's behind this?
Yeah.
And, then I feel like I can find my way out a little bit from there.
Yeah.
So, one of the things we wanted to do towards the end of this is, I know we have a few people on live. If you want to add any questions to the chat, we may open it up to do a little bit of Q&A, or if you have anything that struck you that you want to know more about, any more of our secrets or more of our stories. You can also
raise your hand and I can unmute you if you
want.
Oh
yeah, Jen, you could do it that way. Yeah. Jen is the Zoom master here. She knows how to make that work.
Right. So you either put it in the chat or raise the hand if you have any questions or comments or anything you want to add to the conversation.
Yeah. One of the themes that I've noticed from this conversation is sort of the hopeful theme, I will say, is it is possible to break patterns.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. And you
But
both have a participant in that. I was just going to say it comes from both sides.
Yes.
But
Well,
I would
that's-
also say, I would just also say that you can only control your side. So even if the other person is not willing, you can start doing it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I think even for me, like, I don't think it was one-sided. I think even during the thing with my mom and I a few years back, I think I did a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm about to say she didn't do her work, but I think a lot of the heavy lifting was also on me as well. So, you know, a lot changed from me doing the heavy lifting because she was able to have somewhere to go with that from there. Right now, she's able to have, now we're able to have real conversations and hard conversations because I can be present and then she can be present. Right. So, but it can be a lot to take on from both sides. And sometimes we don't always get two people, which is why I'm really grateful that we have, the four of us here where it's like, wow, this is a little, I guess, unique because we have all of us participating in the growth of our relationships, which is amazing. I think that's what makes this amazing.
I would also say that there's so much more that we certainly didn't talk about.
Oh, yeah.
And I made so many mistakes. But I was very shut down and in fight flight, I think, most of my mothering years. So it was just go, go, go.
Mm-hmm.
And work 3 jobs, whatever had to be done had to get done. And I think that the tunnel vision, the vision just got smaller and smaller and smaller of what I knew I had to do and what I could do. And I think maybe there was a lot of lying to myself, like I was delusional about how great I was knocking it out of the park. And as you get older, you start to see that that's not necessarily what was happening, like that. And that can be painful. And the guilt piece, I mean, there is a trunk load of things that we could talk about that happened, that would lend itself to trauma bonding between Lauren and my son and I, where I do know that I used to say to them when they were kids, and this is where there's no right or wrong in parenting, right? Like, it's just how it can be processed in the child's mind. You can't know that ahead of time. I would say, as long as we're together, we're good, right? Everything's good as long as we're together. And what I didn't realize that made them, I think they really liked that as kids, but then as adults, it reinforced the enmeshment because now we're only okay if we're together. So going away or doing something that must move apart and be more grown up feels like that's where the scary stuff is. Yeah. So you never know how something is going to unravel later. And it's really important to know this is a lifetime of unpacking and being present and allowing. It's not something that happens, oh, I did that last year. That's not how this works.
Yeah. We have someone that has raised their hand. I hope I say this right, and please forgive me if I don't, but Bridget, is that?
Yeah.
I think I asked to. There you go.
Yeah, she's unmuted. There you go.
You got it. Well, first, thank you guys for being here and having this conversation. It's fantastic. And I was taking notes through the whole thing and thinking about, and I got into a little bit like, oh yeah, I did that. And some of it was, I did what would have been considered like the good thing. but I'm realizing it came from a place that didn't make it the good thing. So I was going back to like when you saw your mom as human, and I was thinking for like with my daughter, I think I did a lot of like preemptive striking. Like, I suck at this. I'm not good at this. And then that did not allow her to say, you suck at this. You're not good at this. Because it was like, I already took that out of the picture for her. Like, it wasn't an option for her to say, because I already did it. And I have a clear memory. We built a house. And when you build a house from scratch, buying the land, you end up with like all of these, you have the how to, that now everything's online. But at the time I had this giant drawer in my kitchen that had like how to do the microwave, how to do the stove, how to do the sprinkler system. And one time when my daughter was 12 to 14 and just pushing me, like all the buttons were getting niggled, I had a meltdown, and I went to that drawer and I just started, she's standing there in the kitchen. I started pulling these flyers out, like the microwave, this, I'm screaming, pulling these things out. There's no freaking brochure for you. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody gave me a brochure. I don't know what to do with you. Like, I was overwhelmed. And in the moment, like looking back, it's like, oh, how beautiful. You admitted all of your crap. But now I'm realizing like, wow, yeah, but that was so preemptive. Like, I never gave her the opportunity to go, you freaking suck. So huge realization. And like goosebumps right now, because that moment just sticks out in my mind so much on what she looked like on the other side of the kitchen counter and what it felt like to be like throwing papers all over the kitchen.
Okay.
Like, I know how to install a doorknob, like, and throwing just things. And no one gave me a brochure. I just brought you home, and there you were.
Mothers across America are identifying with you right now. I'm just going to tell you that.
Yeah.
I think we all had our moments.
It's amazing how, in one way you guys were talking about how it's, so nice to let them know that they, that you make mistakes, and yet the way, and so I was always going, oh, good girl, like you told her you didn't always have the answers. But now I'm realizing always the yin and yang of all of those things and where they come from. So thank you so much for that.
That's actually a really good awareness.
That's really insightful.
That's
well,
very.
It shows, I was just gonna say, it shows that intention is really important in everything, right? Why, and then in questioning why you're doing it, because it can change the dynamic of taking like you said, the good thing, but the intention is so that I don't have to hear you tell me that your experience of it being bad. So I'm just gonna say it's bad. I did it. It's bad. So now you don't have that opening or feel like you do.
Yeah. And my mom was an alcoholic, but she was not a closet alcoholic. She told everyone she was an alcoholic, and no one ever came to save me. So it's literally the same dynamic, right? Like, I couldn't call her out on all the drugs.
She owned it.
It was right. No, she just threw it out there. There was no secrecy at all. And so here I was trying so hard to not do that same thing. I didn't have an alcohol or drug problem. There were other things, and then looking back on it going, oh, same thing. Same thing. Yeah.
It was less. It was very less, much less. Not as bad as, much more doable.
Right. Same damage. Could be the same damage, but yes, completely different. So it's, yeah. Been fascinating. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the journey, isn't it? I mean, that's what we're all on, is a journey. Whether it's the mother-daughter or just in all of our relationships, but the mother-daughter relationship, I think, does really shape our lives. Mm-hmm. And as we come up on our promised closing time, what I thought would be nice for us to do is just have each of us briefly speak about how people can find out or find each of us in our respective worlds, and also how they can just find out more about what we do. So let me start. Lauren, let me start with you.
You can find me at lgmmethod.com. Also, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook is LGM Method as well.
LGM, as
Yes.
in Martinson, your last name.
Lauren Grace Martinson Method.
There you go, LGM Method. Beautiful. And you're on TikTok?
Yes.
What do you do on TikTok?
So I actually have been doing videos sharing tools with people from various books, various personal development books, certain exercises that we all seem to skip usually in those books. Yeah, I'll get to that later. Let me just read this book. Well, I actually have pulled out some of my favorite ones and just basically talk about it on those videos.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm not on TikTok, so I need you to post them somewhere else so I can watch them.
I do share them on Instagram. So if
you
have
good.
Instagram,
okay. I think I may be following you there then. Okay, good. Good. All right. Jen, how about you?
You can just go to my website, maneelyconsulting.com, MANEELY consulting.com, or just shoot me an email, Jennifer@maneelyconsulting.com.
Yeah. And describe a little bit about what it is you do, especially with parents.
Yes. So I work with the families that have loved ones with substance abuse. So I talk to a lot of the parents, just try to help them navigate that whole confusing world where people can get really lost. It's hard. So sometimes you just need a guide through the darkness, and that's kind of what I do.
Yeah. Good. Christine, tell us about what you do and how to find you.
I would say I always end up saying things like, I'll say one thing and then I feel like I have to add a but to the other side. Like I said, when I talked about the mirror, empathize, validate, I've seen people actually take that as a weapon and use it because their intention was to take control of conversations instead of have clearing. So I would say when you're talking about being vulnerable and allowing a child or a parent to have their perception of things, that can also be weaponized depending on the person, because if you're dealing in a pathological relationship with someone who is narcissistic or borderline or oppositional defiant or any of those things, there's always a power struggle happening there and a control of the narrative. So you wouldn't handle those necessarily in the same way. So I just feel like I wanted to.
I'm glad you added that clarity.
Put that in there.
Yeah.
I worked for a long time in with people, helping them get sober, and then working as a sober coach. There's a huge amount of crossover with pathological relationships and addiction, because pathological relationships with all the gaslighting, love bombing, abuse, lying, everything, people get stuck. It literally creates a loop in their brain that doesn't allow them to be able to leave. And addiction, like turning to drugs or alcohol, is a way to leave without leaving. And it's taking you out, right? And I saw those correlations, and it seems that you always say, like, you get the perfect people to work with you, like if you put out the right energy. And I tend to work with people who have had those relationships and are trying to get back to themselves, and because you lose yourself in them. So finding a way back to yourself and knowing even who you are now, that because you're living in someone else's brain and nervous system just to be safe the whole time. So I work as a transformational mentor, and I use hypnotherapy and equine assisted coaching as other tools to be able to help people, get the life that they want to live and not and heal from this, find themselves.
That's beautiful. I love the term transformational mentor. it's really potent when you start talking about true transformation.
Yeah.
What's your website?
So, oh yeah, give us your
onthepathcoaching.net.
onthepathcoaching.net. And we'll have all of this for those of you who are listening in the show notes as well. And for me, the best way to find me is at my website, lynncarnes.com. And there you can subscribe to the Coaching Digest, which is, I put it out weekly, and it really is everything I coach on, all of my tools, blogs, everything is there for free. And then once in a while, somebody will actually want me to do true executive coaching with them. And that's what I do when I work with someone one-on-one is executive coaching, typically more entrepreneurs than ever now, but also with senior executives in the corporate world. So finding me at lynncarnes.com, you can find me there. And of course, you may have found that through this podcast if you're listening. This will go out on both the Creative Spirits Unleashed podcast and Jen Manili's Unbreakable Boundaries podcast.
I would add one thing.
Please.
If anybody out there has questions or needs support around the pathological relationships, whether that was a parent or a love relationship, I've been doing this thing called First Fridays. It's a free,
oh yes, it's awesome.
A free group call the first Friday of every month. So it'll be next Friday. So if you go to my website, you can sign up for that for free. And it's already started being great conversations on there. Great group of people.
I did the last one, and I'm going to just endorse it right now. It was worth being there. So sign up for that if you can. It's really great. So with that, we promised to be done at 3:00, and we are at 3:00. How about that?
How about that?
Thank you all so much for joining and for having this conversation. And I look forward to future conversations because we're all friends, and we will be back plotting new ideas after this one. So thank you, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Yes. With that, we'll close.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.